Welcome, 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 everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Juana Estrada. Thank you so much for all of you joining here. I see that we have a couple of folks still joining our call here today. So I'm going to give about 2 minutes to ensure that all of our members here are joining us. And then while we wait, I would love to hear from anybody here who is new to our network. If this is your first time attending a Latinas in Tech event or a first time attending an event sponsored by Capital One here in the network, I highly encourage you to please add in the chat where you're joining us from. I know that we have a large community. I'm joining in today live from Chicago here in the Midwest. So if you're in the chat, we'd love to hear from you to see where you're joining us from. Awesome. I see we have some allies from New Jersey, Ohio in the house, Canada, Texas. Amazing, amazing. Thank you to all of you today who are joining us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll just give one more minute so that folks can come right in, then we'll get right into today's programming. And to all of you who are newcomers today, thank you so much for choosing today to be the first event that you're joining us here at Latinas in Tech. We have an amazing fireside chat today with executives here at Capital One. So I think that this is going to be an amazing first intro to our experience here at Lit Community. Awesome. Well, we are already at time. So as people chime in, I'll be allowing them into the rooms. But again, to all of you, those who are here today, thank you so much for choosing us as your midday event to join us too. Again, my name is Juana Estrada, and I am the manager here at Latinas in Tech. And I want to first begin with acknowledging our partnership with our amazing sponsor, Capital One. If you're new to network, we typically host many events through our network that are sponsored by our corporate partners. Capital One being one of our truest and most loyal community partner here in our community. Before the call, we're talking about how we're constantly collaborating with our community, offering opportunities for open roles, whether it be here in the U.S. or internationally, like in Mexico. And so we're really grateful for just the continuous partnership with this organization and what they're doing for our community to grow and thrive within the financial tech industry. To those who are new to our network, to learn more about how we support our community, we have our 3 pillars that emphasis on how we can elevate and empower Latina women in the industry to grow, or as we like to call them, to become jefas. And we do that by offering opportunities within professional development, recruitment opportunities such as open roles and jobs at the open corporate partners that we have. And also, 2, we offer a plethora of opportunities for mentorship. So if you are looking for a mentor, or if you're a mentor yourself and looking to become a mentor to one of our mentees here in our network, please reach out to us and I'll add some information in the chat later on today to learn more about these resources. In addition, by becoming a member, it is free of charge. And so we highly encourage you to visit our website and open up a profile. And that is how you become a member here at Latinas in Tech. And there you have access to our 27,000 plus members of women and allies. And we are across 22 different chapters across the globe. So we are in London and Madrid and Mexico and Canada. And
Did we lose Juanita?
we're all here for today. I am extremely grateful for the Capital One community for offering opportunity for us to connect with Daniela Jorge, who is the Chief Design Officer here at Capital One. And before we begin and adding all the information, I want to pass the mic to our incredible moderator for today, Alejandra Rios, who is the Director of Enterprise Architecture and SDLC at Capital One. So Alejandra, I'm going to now pass the mic to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Juana. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today to help kick off Hispanic Heritage Month. My name is Alejandra Rios, and I'm the Director of Enterprise Architecture and Software Delivery Lifecycle at Capital One. Today, we have the pleasure of spending some time with Daniela, Chief Design Officer at Capital One. But before we hop in, I want to share with you a bit about her. She leads an organization of several hundred designers in support of Capital One's mission to help customers succeed by bringing ingenuity, simplicity, and humanity to banking. She was previously the Chief Design Officer at PayPal and Vice President of Design at AT&T. She serves on the board of directors for Mr. Cooper Group, Bay Brazil, and she's a board advisor at Loft. She's also a distinguished advisor and founding member of the Design Executive Council. Daniela graduated with an MFA in computer graphics and BFA in industrial design, and she's originally from Brazil. We're so excited to learn about her career journey and her experiences. Welcome, Daniela.
Thank you, Ale. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all who joined, and looking forward to the conversation and the questions that we'll get later on as well.
Awesome. So our plan for today is to go through a few questions, and we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So get your questions ready for Daniela and submit your questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom. Let's get started, Daniela. First question for you. You are truly a trailblazer in the design world with an impressive track record of driving business value across various industries. Can you tell us about your journey and how you got here? What inspired you to start a career in design?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think one of those atypical people in that I've been in design my entire career, right? I think it's normal for people to pivot, and I've been in the same field, different industries, obviously. But I decided I wanted to study design when I was 14, and it was thanks to my dad. I knew I wanted to do something creative. I really enjoyed making stuff and creating. I really enjoyed art classes, but I didn't know exactly what in design. And my dad was a journalist, and he would get cars to test drive before they actually came on the market, and he had to write reports after. So I was always like paying attention to how the cars worked because I liked to contribute to the reports he was writing. And I remember I was sitting in the back of the car, and my knee kept hitting the window button, so the window kept going down. And I was like, this is really bad. Like, why would they put the button here? And my dad was like, well, you should look at this thing called industrial design or product design, which is, you know, designing these products that we all use, including car interiors. So that's how I then looked into industrial design. I fell in love with this concept of actually designing and creating things that we use every day. And that's how I got into design. And then in grad school, switched to computer design, which is now called UX. Or product design, but working on virtual or digital experiences. And in terms of my career, I was an immigrant, so I moved here to the US to go to school. And when I started looking for jobs, one of my constraints is I needed a company
Para la cuna, okay.
to sponsor my visa. And back then, that wasn't as common. Even though I went to work at a very large company, they were still figuring out what does it mean to sponsor someone's visa. So I ended up in some ways sticking to larger companies that were the ones that had the means and the stability to keep sponsoring my visa and eventually my green card, etc. So with that, I fell in love with this notion of solving problems for hundreds of millions of people. Right, it's a very different space than when you're like scaling or in a smaller niche space. So really figuring out like how do you work on things that you put in the hands of hundreds of millions of people and do it so that it's solving their problems, so that it's easy is what has made me stick with design and why I'm excited to still be doing this here at Capital One. And then the last piece of my journey was the move to people leadership. And that was, again, being in these large, complex environments, figuring out that you might have people who were really creative, but didn't necessarily know how to operate in complex environments. So helping create the best environment where they could bring their amazing craft skills to these large companies and work well with cross-functionally to get all of their ideas realized.
Can you tell us a bit more about your people leader journey? What are some key leadership skills that have helped you succeed in this field, specifically in design?
Yeah, I always say that I brought like the same skills that I learned as a designer to people leadership. So in design, we tend to be very customer centric, like really getting to know users. And I think it's the same when you're working with people, whether you're a people leader or not. And, all of us have to collaborate with others. So the first one is just getting to know people as people first. I feel like, especially in the heat of the moment, sometimes it's easy for us to forget that. But when you've invested in building that relationship first, it's so much easier to get hard things done. And I love that about Capital One. So I've been here for just a little bit over a year now. And one of the best surprises was as I was going into our meet and greets that we set up when you're new and you're coming in and meeting a bunch of people, everyone started with personal introductions, and they were very detailed. It wasn't just like, hey, I'm located in this city. I have 2 kids. No, people get like super detailed with their personal intros, and I love that about our culture. And I feel like that's such an important thing if you're in a company where maybe that's not built in, like what we have here at Capital One. Getting to know people, going for a coffee, going for lunch, just taking the time to get to know them. And then going deep, like understand their motivations, know what's keeping them up at night, like where are they coming from? So that if you're coming from different directions, like how do you actually build that alignment and find common ground? Because again, at the end of the day, I think in these business environments, we're all trying to solve for the same thing, but we might be speaking about it in different languages, and again, not realizing that we have shared goals. So those are some of the mindsets that I've brought from design into people leadership that have helped me throughout my career.
Daniela, you have a history of success across a wide range of customers and industries. What's your approach to making strategic decisions that help balance excellence in your field, which is design, and balance that with business goals?
I love this question. And I will say before I answer, specifically about how this plays out for me, I feel like it's a really important competency that when I see very effective leaders, which is this notion of what I call boundaryless leadership. Meaning, yes, you're there because of your own specialty, but having a total ownership mindset, right? And not being like, well, that's not my job. That's above my pay grade, like really feeling total ownership and feeling like you can contribute and should feel ownership over the success of the entire team, of the goals of the company, not feeling pigeonholed or I think self-limiting is I think a really important trait in leadership, in my opinion. So in terms of my own experience, I'm a believer that customer needs and business goals always intersect very nicely. If you think about like when companies start, they're usually starting because they found a problem, right, with a set of potential customers that they can solve. Like you have a pain point somewhere and someone's like, I could do this better, let me start a business. And that's also true when companies scale, right? I think as long as you continue to center on the customer, you will continue to deliver business value while also delivering for that customer. So that's one of the ways that I always intersect like my design thinking mind with solving for the business. So it starts with being customer centric. Again, get to really, really know your customer, get to know their pain points. Focus really on the problem versus the solution. The solution will come. But I think as humans, it's really easy for us to fall in love with our own ideas of a solution and sometimes lose sight of the problem that you're trying to solve. I always go back to like a really old classic. For anyone who read The Innovator's Dilemma by Clay Christensen, you might remember this anecdote. But he went on to share the story about a company that had hired him. It was a fast food company. They wanted to figure out how to boost sales. And they had this insight where they were seeing that people were buying milkshakes in the morning, which seems like unusual, right? So what can happen oftentimes these companies will be like, well, people are into milkshakes. Let's think about how to make milkshakes better, right? And then you may like try to incrementally make milkshakes better, but not necessarily see the business results that you're after. So place companies head out to understand like, why were people buying milkshakes in the morning? Like, what problem was it solving? In his book, he calls like, what job were they hiring the milkshake to do for them? And what they found out is customers were buying milkshakes during their morning commute. And the reason being, milkshakes are very filling. They fill you for a while. They can also like last a long time in terms of like how long it takes you to consume the milkshake. And it's something that you can do while driving. So it really unlocked this insight of people are looking for something that's very filling in the morning, that can be, eaten with one hand, and that will last during the commute, because commutes can be boring. So it's also like partly a distraction. And that can then open the aperture for other solutions that aren't just limited to let's make the milkshake better. So that's why I always say like really, really try to dig down and understand like what jobs customers, are hiring your products to do, or what other pain points they may have, so that you can be innovating. And in design, we use this framework to capture this approach. It's a double diamond, if you can picture that. So two sort of diamonds side by side. And it all starts with, you might have a hypothesis for a problem. You then go and really observe customers, talk to customers, try to find out, why they're doing what they're doing or what's not working for them. So you open the aperture of the problem. So that's the first sort of flaring of the diamond. You then hone into the specific problem that you want to solve. You then flare again in exploring a bunch of solutions that can solve that problem. So again, you're not landing on just the easiest solution or the most obvious solution. And you test then those concepts with customers until you reach, the best solution to put in their hands. And Ali, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I enjoyed the story about the milkshake. I'm curious to see what solutions they found outside of a milkshake. That doesn't sound very healthy. Maybe you could share some personal examples of an innovative or successful customer product or experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share a couple recent ones from that our teams have worked on. The first one is an ability to add cash in store. So if you think about it, we have, some people may get paid in cash, or they may have cash that they get from friends and family, and depositing it in, to their checking account so that they can then go and use that cash to pay bills online or shop online, or, turn it into digital currency, if you will, can be a pain point, especially if someone doesn't live near a branch, doesn't live near, one of the cafes. So that was an innovation that we introduced, where you could actually make these cash deposits at CVS or Walgreens locations. Those are part of people's routines. You may be going there to pick up a prescription or do some shopping, and then having that convenience of being able to also deposit cash into your checking accounts, I think is a great example of, again, really understanding customer needs and then thinking of solutions that might be more outside of the box than what you might think of initially when you're thinking about, making deposits into a checking account. Another one that I think speaks more to the sort of solution piece of the design process is one that we call Services Finder. So we've probably all, used bank applications where you would go in and you'd be like, well, show me, the ATM locations or branch locations. And what our team did was really try to get down to what are customers trying to do. So instead of coming at it sort of like, here we have cafes or we have ATMs, it was like, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to deposit a check, here are the best locations or the best options for how you can do that, right? If you're trying to get cash, here's the best. So again, starting with like the task or the job that the customer is trying to fulfill and orienting the experience that way when you go into our app.
How do you inspire and manage your teams to create an innovating environment or to foster creativity? Any tips you can give?
So the first thing I think is really being intentional when you're building teams, and diversity is a really important aspect of that. And I think diversity in every respect, everything from our backgrounds and our identities to how people think, their communication style. So the more diversity you have on teams, I think the more we inspire each other and the more we come up with like better solutions and have more empathy for, the millions of customers that we serve. And I think the other one is what I mentioned in the beginning, which is it's really important to invest the time for teams to connect, so that we all know each other. We all know, what's going on in someone's personal life. We know what's happening for them at work. We know what they're trying to achieve in their careers, etc. So again, knowing people as like full people is really important, and creating that space for everyone to get to know each other. An example of that is last week we had a leadership summit with our senior directors plus on the design team, and spent time on a number of topics, everything from developing our business acumen to really focusing on what are the competencies that each person in the room wants to develop. And then even doing peer coaching where people were like exchanging ideas of what they were thinking of doing and getting feedback from each other. So creating these moments of connection and where we can all support each other are really important.
Yeah, I really love that. I liked where you were going about the design thinking. How can businesses in general just integrate this design thinking into their core strategies and operations?
So the first part, like we talked about, is again just really getting to know customers. One of the things that we like to do is having a learning agenda. So, and there's a couple of things that I think can work really well. One is start off with what the team thinks they already know about customers. And there's a fabulous exercise that I like to apply to that, which is then bucket things on like what are facts, like we actually have data that supports this insight about our customers, and what might be like opinions that maybe have built over time but we've never validated. So really start with like grounding ourselves on what do we already know, what do we need to go learn, and then keep this sort of evergreen learning agenda throughout a project where you're constantly plugging it in with questions that you need answering throughout the life cycle of a project, but where you're always centering it on the customers, right? And the questions that need answered about the customers. And then the second part is, I think, just making the space for solutioning. Again, I think it's so easy because, as businesses, we're always trying to act with speed, but it's always so easy to fall into that trap of going with the most obvious solution or the easiest solution. But it doesn't take too much. Like you could literally 3 hours, cross-functional group can brainstorm a range of solutions to really, decide which one might be the best course of action. It doesn't have to be a huge investment, but just really watching for that trap of not just going with like the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, and to pull that thread, there's a lot of like trends that emerge in the industry. How do you ensure that your leadership reflects what's evolving as an industry standard and what's been proven to be a success?
I love that. I think that outside in, is so important to both keep on top of trends, changes in customer behavior and expectations. What are like either competitors or even analogous companies doing in the space that can serve as inspiration.
All right, I'm going to give you one last question before we take it to Q&A. We are in the midst of Hispanic Heritage Month. Can you tell us what this means to you and how it reflects your own experiences? And do you have any words of wisdom for our Latinas in tech audience?
Yes, no, it's always a really great moment of reflection. I think a lot about my own ancestors and the struggles, the accomplishments that they had as immigrants themselves to Brazil. and those who are native to, as most Brazilians, quite mixed. So I think really reflecting on those who have come before us, who has given us the opportunities that enable us to be where we are today, is really important. We should do that every day, but especially I think pausing and really reflecting on that this month. I always also think about the power of community. I think that that's one of the most beautiful things about, our Latin community. As an immigrant myself, that was so helpful when I came here as, in my late teens and had to find a support network and rebuild my network and my community in a brand new country. So I think to keep giving back to the community and keep supporting each other so that we can continue to achieve amazing things is maybe less advice, but more of a call to action to everyone listening here. It's amazing to have a built-in community that we can lean on and be inspired by. And then on that point of, celebrating the entire year, right? It definitely, we need to do that every single day. That's something that we do at Capital One with events like this one. Earlier this year, we hosted an event with the Latinas in Tech chapter in Mexico as well. In late October, I'll be speaking at the High Tech Summit here at Capital One, and just celebrating our associates and supporting each other. I saw earlier someone was talking about wanting a mentor. There's so many ways that we can all support each other. And it's an honor to be a part of this organization and to also support organizations like Latinas in Tech in this endeavor.
Yeah, and like you said, when people can be their authentic selves, their whole selves, even in the workplace, it creates an environment for innovation and creativity and openness. That's
Absolutely.
amazing. Should we field some questions from the chat? Juana, do you maybe have some?
Yeah, actually, we do have some questions here. We do have one question asked. And this one is for Daniela. So it's asking, as someone who was with a creative background in art and design, but without a formal degree in design, they're curious, what advice would you give them if they're on how to successfully pivot into design field? And what advice would you give them to transfer those skills into showcasing their background within the tech industry?
That's a really great question, and obviously very timely since we do see folks pivoting into different tech roles, and I think design is also just a great way to get into a tech field. The first thing that I would say is I think that there are some good courses out there. It is helpful and important to get some training if you're able to, so that at least some of the basics or foundational aspects of design. It's not an absolute requirement, but it will help. The second thing is there are many programs that help you, at companies like ours. We have a design development program, and in other companies too, things like apprenticeships, I think, can be a really great way of also getting that practical training in a field like design. And then the last plug that I would put in is there are many companies, nonprofits, for instance, or organizations that can benefit from design help. So finding those volunteering opportunities where maybe you're reading up on design, you're starting to play with designing things yourself. There's so many resources out there, but you have to then build out a portfolio, which is hard to do before you can get a design job. But there's a lot of ways to volunteer and do volunteer projects in order to build out our portfolios. So that's another really great strategy, and it then helps you practice understanding how to work with customers and stakeholders, which is a really big part of the job that we do. It helps you understand, okay, what is the audience, that this nonprofit is trying to reach? How can I help them communicate and connect with their audience through experiences?
Thank you so much, Daniela. We actually have a couple of questions here that are asking for specific resources, maybe even podcasts related to design and UX you can suggest.
Gosh, that is such a great question. And there's so many of them. There is one that I really appreciate. It's by an agency or an organization called Fuego. And I like it obviously because it has, a Latin focus. So it's Fuego UX, I believe. If anyone from the design team is here and can validate that, that would be super helpful if you could post it in chat. I really enjoyed their podcast. There are folks who, who have been in our design field and have been sort of influencers for decades and decades. I think it's never, they continue to post really helpful content. So folks like Jacob Nielsen are really great to follow. Peter Merholtz, who also posts quite frequently. And then just looking at, there's so many folks posting on LinkedIn every day. So go look at your favorite companies, like companies that you really admire, and look at folks that might be in leadership positions or designers in those companies. Follow them on LinkedIn, because one of the things that has happened over the last few years is that there's always daily sound bites on LinkedIn. I follow it myself. I'm always learning new things. So there's a number of sources that you can follow, from podcasts to LinkedIn posts to folks who write on Medium, and hopefully many others that folks could also share in our chat.
Thank you so much for sharing those recommendations. I did want to ask a follow-up to that. A lot of people are also asking in relationship to how to build a strong portfolio if they are transitioning into a UX design role, and also just gaining experience that resonates with hiring managers within those themes.
Yep. So the portfolio piece, again, if you're doing something like a boot camp or training, you'll get the opportunity to to build a portfolio through your classes. And then what I mentioned about volunteering opportunities would be another great way. You can also look within your network and people that like, don't feel like, I think oftentimes people will think, well, let me go and redesign the Capital One app, and that's how I'll show my design chops. That can be a strategy. What I've seen sometimes happen in those cases is, because you don't have access to the insights, you will make a lot of assumptions in making design decisions, right? And that may not be, they may not be the right assumptions, because you're not going to have access to those customers. So you might know someone who owns a small business. Maybe they don't need an actual solution from you, but if you have access to that person and you have access to their customers, then you can create a case study for your portfolio that can be much more legitimate and much more valid. If you're going to do like a big brand, maybe still like try to talk to friends and family at least, and like get some access to customers, so that you can be basing a lot of your design decisions on the insights that you're collecting. So that's what I would suggest, is just think about like, what kind of light customer research can you do? Synthesize those as part of what you're putting in your portfolio, and then tie those to the design decisions that you're making. Like, resist the urge to just take an app and like just redesign it to make it look better, but without grounding it on any sort of like customer insights that led to those decisions.
Thank you so much for that. I have a really interesting question here that asks, are there any concerns with AI platforms for design and tech development teams, despite the degree of certifications that they have? Are there any concerns with AI platforms?
That's a broad question, so maybe I'll take two angles in answering the question, and whoever asked, if you wanted to give more details in chat. I think one thing that we need to keep an eye on, which is similar to anything else that we design, is obviously watching out for bias, right? Making sure that we're building products, again, that include the most diverse data models and diverse perspectives, so that we're not building in bias into our models, and therefore building products that are limited in that regard. So I think the same principles of knowing customers, of testing, of validating with the broadest possible set, and the most diverse set of customers remain true. when it comes to AI platforms. And then on the other side, because I've also had, heard this question come up, which is more specific about like AI platforms and what it means for doing the job of a designer, right? Will it replace us? Will it replace our jobs? What I would say is that I think it will just be another tool in the toolkit. I've been long enough in the field to remember when digital tools came into play. Before then, people were doing design work by hand, right? And using like physical materials to create, whether it was graphic design or whatever it might be. And when desktop publishing came around, everyone was really concerned that the job of designers would be threatened because anyone could create, a flyer, a poster, a book cover on their computer. And here we are, 30 plus years later, and that hasn't happened. Those skills, are still in demand and more than ever. So what I would say is that I view AI as just another tool in the toolkit that we'll be able to use as designers.
Thank you for that response and just adding optimism to that perspective as well. I think a lot of people currently are facing those questions and fears and concerns. So it's good to hear from your perspective that we shouldn't worry.
I think we should stay on top of it, right? But
Yes.
not worry that our jobs will completely disappear. I think they'll transform.
Absolutely, absolutely. Could agree more. We do have some really good questions more on like the business side. We have somebody here who was asking, do you have advice on how to bridge the gap between business strategy teams and the UX product teams to avoid the both of them being siloed?
Yes, absolutely. And it goes back to some of the things that we touched on already. One of the things that we were discussing in the leadership summit that I mentioned with my team was just even for the designers to just take the time and sit down with their business and product partners and understand the economics, like how does our product make money? What are the risks? What are the things that we need to watch for? And really being well versed in that will both make you a better designer and a better problem solver, but also will help you speak when you're presenting your design recommendations to create that connection between what you're recommending and how it also takes into account the business goals and the business needs that the cross-functional team needs to keep in mind. So I always say, just ask. I've never, I think, come across a business or a product partner who wasn't interested in sitting down with me and explaining those things when I would ask them for, to meet me for a coffee and tell me more about like how the business works and what should I be thinking about. So just ask, demonstrate that curiosity, take the time to understand. Don't feel like questions are dumb. Like, I think that there's no dumb questions. And sometimes you may not even be the only one in the room that actually has that question. So I always think it's a good thing to practice is if you have a question, ask it in front of everyone, and just spend time educating yourself and coming up to speed. It will make you, again, more effective problem solver and frankly, much more influential when presenting design recommendations.
I really love that. And I think this actually is a really good change to the next question, which is from a people leader position, what are some things that you do to promote more creativity-based solutions from a less creative staff?
I think everyone is creative. So maybe that's always my starting point. And my mindset is, I think just as we grow up and become adults, we lose the opportunities to do that. So what I would say is, as people leaders and as creative leaders, I think it's incumbent on us not only to create the conditions for design teams to practice their creativity, but for everyone. Some of the best design workshops that I have been in have been workshops where we included legal and risk and all of these functions that need to come together to deliver solutions. And frankly, some of the best ideas came from perhaps what people would think were like the least likely to come up with the most creative ideas. So I think it's the same answer, which is just create those conditions, invite people into the room to be part of ideating and problem solving. Again, when we were talking about diversity in teams and the power in that in coming up with awesome solutions, I think diversity in roles is just as important.
Thank you so much for that. We do have one more question. I want to just reiterate, we do have still time here. So anybody here who wants to add a question in the chat, or you also feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask it live. We highly encourage that. We do have a question here that says, you know, for you, Daniela, how does Capital One define impact in its design process? And how is that definition integrated in your own design strategy from concept to execution?
That's a great question. So we try to define what success will look like, you know, for each project. And even though we do look at some standard metrics of customer experience, obviously there will be business metrics, and then there's metrics of customer experience, things like, is this usable? Are customers satisfied, right? Net promoter, likelihood to recommend. I'm also a big believer that those can be tailored for each project. One of the really cool things at Capital One, by the way, is that I would say probably 40% of my team works on internal tools. So their metrics, right, might be actually very different than metrics that teams that are working on external facing experiences have. Because it could be that it's about making our developers more productive and efficient. It could be about building tools for finance professionals at Capital One that are also about making them more productive and efficient. So those success metrics will vary depending on who your audience is and what the project is setting out to do. But I love this question because I think it's so important to anchor what the success look like before, you know, you get started. And again, back to that point of being really clear on the problem and on the success, we'll make sure that teams have those checks and balances so that you don't get like super excited as humans tend to do about a very specific solution. And sometimes it's like you get so attached to it that you lose sight of whether or not it's really, really solving the problem the best possible way and really delivering against all of the success metrics that you should set up front. So I would say standard, you know, set of metrics, customized depending on what the problem is and who the audience is.
I love how everyone's sharing their own journeys to becoming designers in the chat.
Yes, this is awesome.
People sharing their LinkedIn and their experiences as well.
Absolutely. I have a really awesome question here, and I love hearing these, especially from your position, Daniela. You know, have you experienced imposter syndrome in your career progression? And if so, how have you been able to navigate it?
For sure. Right, don't we all suffer some level of imposter syndrome where you're like in a room and you're like, I don't know that I belong here. I'll share a more recent one. I joined a board of a company a couple of years ago. First of all, I never even thought that someone with a design background could be on the board of directors of a public company. So not only, you know, that wasn't on my radar, and it took a mentor to make me realize that that was something that could be within my reach. But I remember showing up to the first meeting and being like, I have no business being here. Like, these people are super smart and, you know, they know finance really well and they know operations really well. And I'm like the you know, weird kid in the group, like from a design background, etc. And then I checked myself and realized that, like, well, but I'm not here because they're looking for people who know what they already know, right? They added me to the board because I bring a different perspective to the room. So reminding myself of like what I value and what I tell my own team is important when we're supporting others, and building diverse teams is what helps me get over that. So I think it's important to think about, remind yourself about like, why are you in the room, and that it's not about comparing yourself to others or being like others, that there was a compelling reason why you're there, right? There was a compelling reason why you got hired, why you got invited to a meeting. etc. And not, you know, and resisting that temptation to compare yourself to others, because like that comparison is the thief of joy, right, as they say. It's very human, but just try to reground yourself. I always tell people when I have folks come to me with imposter syndrome, I jokingly tell them, I'm like, well, then you're questioning our judgment in adding you to this project or hiring you into this role or wanting to interview for this role. So I now do that to myself, right? I'm like, I'm not going to question their judgment in selecting me to be here.
I love that answer so much. And I do 100% agree. Sometimes we forget that we bring an extra flair, right? Where we are another asset to the resources. So that's a good perspective to have. We have here one that's just popped up. Thank you for that question. It says, as someone who is a super fan of your career, how do you search for mentors? And are they in your line of work? Are they business leaders, execs? You know, how do you find mentorship at your current career?
I love that question. And I recently published on our Capital One blog a post about what I call personal board of directors that I highly recommend you go read, because I will be honest, I never had a formal mentor in my entire career, but I've had many informal mentors throughout my career. And it's always been a group of people, and it's never looked like what one might think of when we think of mentors, because it's consisted of, yep, absolutely managers and former managers, or, you know, more senior leaders, also peers. So like many of my peers have been the best mentors for me, and then people on my team, right? So people who report to me or are even lower down, who have been open in giving me feedback and pointing out things that I should be thinking about and encouraging me. So I'm a big believer in this notion of a board of directors. It's not an official group. Someone asked me recently, right, do they get together and all like give you feedback? I'm like, no, I'm obviously having like, you know, ad hoc and one-off conversations with each person that is like in my mind part of this board of directors. But there are those people like on my contact list that I go to when I need advice, or when I need a reality check, or when I need like, you know, really like true feedback, and to do that sort of self-reflection exercise when I'm at crossroads, when I'm you know, trying to decide, should I take this job, should I make a move? And it can vary over the years. It has varied over the years. And then there's some people who have been on that board of directors, if you will, for many years. But that's what has worked the best for me. And the most important thing, as I said on the post, is you want people that will support you and that will be cheerleaders, but will never hold back from telling you the truth. So that's how I've selected who I usually go to for these types of conversations.
It's a really great read. I read it the other day. Rebecca posted the link right here for anyone
Awesome.
who's internal who can check it out.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to offer this moment now to have anybody come off me in case we haven't answered your question.
Not really a question. First of all, thank you so much for all the tips, all the advice, and for sharing your experiences. But I noticed a lot of people were sharing their LinkedIns, and I'd love to connect with everyone, but I was trying to listen while do LinkedIn. So I just kind of made a Google Doc spreadsheet in case people want to add your LinkedIn, add your name to it. That way it's like easy for it to all be in one place and we could all like go on it on our own time. But just kind of wanted to put that out there. And thank you again.
Thank you so much for taking the initiative. The power of creativity is active here. Anyone else would like to ask a question, make a comment? Well, for both you, Alejandra and Daniela, is there anywhere where people here can connect with you post this event today? Would you like to share the information here, or a best approach to connect with you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share my LinkedIn. I'll drop it in here as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, same for me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Threads, even though I never post there, but I've been enjoying getting to know that platform. but LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect with me.
I see, Fatima, you said you have a question. Please feel free to ask.
Hi, yes, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fatima. I work in civic tech as a UX researcher, and I actually transitioned into tech through a boot camp and then an apprenticeship. So I love to hear those tips because they do work, and it's hard work, but definitely paying off. My question is, so I actually did a design boot camp, and then I transitioned because the opportunity lended itself to do a UX research role. Right now, I'm sort of in the second year of this opportunity, and I'm trying to figure out what is the best way or what are some strategies to understand like where to go next in terms of UX is so broad, and you can do design and research and a lot of things in between, content design to be a little bit more specific. But I was wondering if y'all have any tips in terms of like taking a step back and realizing, okay, what are some ways to continue learning what those different roles within UX mean to different companies, and where to hone in on those like transferable skills to kind of take that next step of figuring out what that role might be, whether it's in design or not.
I love that question, and I'll share some advice that I think could work for any field, really. And congratulations, Fatima, on being here and leveraging things like boot camps and apprenticeships. So I have a two-sided way of advising people on this. The first one is really try to ground yourself on what gives you energy, because I feel like you will always be at your best if you're leveraging those things that give you energy, right? And where you're at your best, and you appreciate this as a researcher. I tell mentees to do this exercise that I borrowed from research. It's almost like a diary study. Like every day at the end of your day, write down what gave you energy that day and what sapped your energy, and do that for a week, 2 weeks, however long. Is helpful for you to start seeing patterns. It's also really helpful. I saw a question earlier, someone was asking about like IC versus individual contributor track versus people management. It can really be helpful in clarifying in figuring out which path you should take, because again, you'll see those patterns and it will help you realize which one of those jobs may be the one that will be the most fulfilling for you. And then the second part to this is then do some research on potential things that you might want to be considering. So go interview people in different jobs and ask them, like, how do you spend your day, right? What are the most challenging aspects of your job? What are the most fulfilling aspects of your job? And do that with as many people as you're able to do, so that again, you can then see from your list of, what fulfills you and what saps your energy and what you're learning from others, like that might give you some hints of what to hone in on. So I definitely suggest a bit of a research-backed approach into this question.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And I see I have one more final person here. Debs, if you would like to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Hello, hello everyone. Thank you, Daniela and Alejandra, for this inspiring talk. And Daniela, while you were speaking, I went on LinkedIn, did a little look how your brilliant career, and as a fellow Brazilian here in Capital One, I find it specifically inspiring, like everything you've been doing. And later next month, I'm gonna be speaking in a conference for Latinas in tech, especially college age. And I was doing some research of what to do. And, if anyone read the book Invisible Women, there's a lot of bias. And I'm actually in the data science area. And I don't remember the last time I was in a meeting with other tech women. And when I look up at leadership, everyone has, well, there's not a lot of people that look like me. So I was thinking in a way that even though acknowledging this bias, but how would you advise to, inspire other Latinas that are starting, and they see this bias, they see this barrier, and how to, I don't know, maybe switch the way to think. I don't know, what's your advice for, especially talking to a crowd of people who are starting, like Latinas is starting in tech?
Yeah. So I think you're doing it already, right? Step one is having role models like you who are getting in front of people so that they can actually say like, wow, that's, first of all, I didn't know that that career existed, or I didn't know that that could be a career for me, similar to the example that I shared about, my experience in boards. I think that that's the most important thing, is that all of us need to get there, so that people can actually see that these professions exist, that these professions are accessible to them, and help them just be inspired to pursue that, the career. I think that flywheel needs to be there for us to change the picture of what it is. So kudos for you for doing that.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Kelly. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So someone asked this in the chat, and I was thinking something like this, right? Like along the line. So I'm gonna piggyback on the person who said, "What advice would you give to your younger self?" And I'm just thinking this, right? Because Alejandra came from Colombia, right? Daniela from Brazil. I'm from Venezuela. And I think a lot of our stories, we have a lot of similar stories on this call, and whoever watches this, later. So I wanted to ask, both of you, what will you tell your younger self now that we are here, right? Like it's been a journey and it's been years and we're here now. So what would you say to your younger self?
Gosh, it's interesting when I think about my younger self, I actually think about how fearless I was at that age. So if anything, I think my advice would be more to like my mid-career self, because I think it's when you start maybe like noticing constraints and putting constraints on yourself, right? When I think about like my 18-year-old moving by myself to a new country to study, etc., like where did I find the courage? I have no clue. But I think it was mid-career where I became more aware of actual constraints, of bias, etc., that perhaps I limited myself more than I could have. So my advice would be probably for that mid-career version of me, which is to again remind myself of my younger self fearlessness, and to approach everything with that same level of fearlessness, and knowing that it's like by putting yourself out there and trying that you break through those constraints. And to, again, keep building that support network, because I think the more we all support each other in those moments of doubt, in those moments where we're lacking confidence, is how we just continue to achieve great things.
Thank you so much for asking that question, Kelly. That's a beautiful way to wrap up today's conversation. And just thank you to both again, to you, Alejandra and Daniela, for your time today in talking to our community and reinvigorating all of us to remember to strive, even if we feel like the outcast, right? As we talked about today, we definitely bring our own flair and perspective, and we are an asset to anywhere that we go. And also to thank you to all of our participants who joined us today. Thank you for your loyalty and engagement today in our conversation. And we look forward to connecting with you on our next event. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you so much. Great spending this time with all of you. Thank you for the great questions.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Bye. Bye.
Good rest of your evening, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.